Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Robert Schoenberger, Editor-in-Chief of IndustryWeek, and welcome to Production Pulse, our bi-weekly live stream where we talk about issues important to the manufacturing world. And today we are talking supply chain with a group of my fellow editors from Endeavor Business Media, IndustryWeek's parent company. I'd just like to go around the room here. First, we have Kevin Jones from our fleet. He is editorial director of the Fleet Group, which includes FleetOwner and Bulk Transporter and several other great magazines. Next to him, we have Tyler Fussner, and Tyler is with Supply Chain Connect. And he is also the chief editor for a new product we have, the Market Moves Supply Chain newsletter. So if you're looking for a newsletter to keep you updated on all things supply chain, we'll have some links for that later. We have Adrienne Selko, who is a former IndustryWeek editor and now spends her time with Material Handling Logistics, one of our great partner brands. And to my right is Anna Smith, who is with us here at IndustryWeek, who's done a lot of coverage over the past year of issues dealing with the Panama Canal and is now looking into what's going on with the Red Sea and shipping issues there. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to talk today. And we're going to start it off with Kevin. Trucking 2022 was a really rough year for the supply chain. We had rising spot rates for the shipping market. We had supply chain issues with semiconductors and parts shortages all over the country. How was 2023 in comparison? How'd the industry do?
Well, freight rates spiked in 2022, so everybody was living high on the hog and on the trucking side. Lots of people jumped into the market to take advantage of it. But then 2023 rolled in. The rates had plateaued and started coming down as fuel was going up. But this is typical for trucking cycles. Everybody jumps in when the markets are great, and then they get run out when the markets are poor. But on top of that, we also had supply chain issues, which helped in terms of the actual new truck availability, keep capacity down some because fleets couldn't get all the equipment they needed. So that contributed to it. So it was on the one hand, the demand was there, the pent up demand, but on the other, it couldn't be met because the equipment wasn't available due to the supply chain shortages. Overall, just in terms of the equipment cost, transportation equipment's up like 20%. But as an economist at an industry event I attended this week said, so was cereal and salad dressing. The difference is that trucks and trucking equipment are part of the supply chain as well as being an end product. So all those costs come down to the carriers. And if you don't have the capital to keep buying your fuel and buy your equipment, you're going to go out of business, which is a typical cycle for the market. So I guess the takeaway from 23 heading into 24 is freight trucking is looking forward to kind of return to the normal cycles after just the who knows what was going to happen 2022, 2023.
Right. It's been several years of chaos. Even pre-COVID, 2019 was an odd year too. So it's been a long time since we've been in a normal world for manufacturing, for shipping, for logistics, for just about everything. So who knows, is 2024 going to be normal? We can hope, I guess. Moving on, Tyler, you've been in the supply chain world with a lot of these issues right now. Can you give us your take on what was 2023 like? How did it compare to previous years?
Sure. So I think 2023 can be seen as shifting to recovery, maybe out of the survival mode that was the last few years with COVID. Preceding that, the supply chain was given the biggest spotlight it's had in recent memory due to COVID, and because of that, I think 2023 also brought in a lot of digital transformation for businesses, and that trend's going to continue well into 2024 and beyond. A lot of the lessons learned before 2023, I think, really came down to supply chain visibility and data availability. So everyone realized how much more insight was needed throughout their supply chain, top to bottom, from sourcing raw materials all the way to getting end product on the shelves. So a lot of investments were made into supply chain visibility software and technology to help these businesses manage their supply chains. I think the major trend was geographic diversification. A lot more onshoring announcements were made, regardless of industry, and there was a big attempt to seek various sourcing partners. I think, again, lessons learned from COVID. Uh, Everyone didn't want to be tied into one or two sources. There was a big need for diversification. Um, if you want to take the electronic component and semiconductor industry, for example, just last month, Samsung announced an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars in a new facility in Japan to focus on like advanced chip packaging. And this is following the United States urging their allies to work together and help counter China's technological prowess of and reliance for a lot of market avenues. But I think one of the biggest things that came out of 2024 that we can follow this year was the inaugural convening of the White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience. So the Biden administration announced a ton of new actions that they're going to be taking. I actually wrote some down. There's many, but I wanted to highlight a couple that I think we should keep an eye on this year. The cross-governmental supply chain data sharing capabilities. There's going to be major investments made into that. There was a launch of a quadrennial supply chain review. The Department of Homeland Security launched a new supply chain resilience center. The DOT is launching the Office of Multimodal Freight Infrastructure and Policy, and the Department of Commerce is convening a supply chain data and analytics summit in this summer. So I think there's a lot of investments being made into the supply chain. 2023 was, like I said, more of a recovery, but also I think everyone had to put their heads together and figure out how do we not perform the way that we did throughout COVID, and how do we really build up that resiliency.
Yeah, here at Industry Week, we've written a lot over the past year about onshoring and nearshoring. And we've seen huge growth in Mexico from people trying to shorten those supply chains, which will have an impact in the future, but it's not necessarily going to make the supply chain job that much easier, given that you're still going to be moving a lot of material from one part of the country to another, or from the southern, across the southern border. But it will eliminate those big Pacific crossings. And so it's going to be something to watch. It'll be an interesting year. Adrian, moving on to you. You're with the MH&L side, and supply chain was a huge thorn for manufacturers in 2022. 2023, any better?
Well, maybe. I'd say it's a mixed bag. On the optimistic side, a recent HSBC survey reported that the historic series of supply chain shocks that have rattled the global economy for 3 years has subsided. They noted that delivery times are falling, port congestion is close to normal, product shortages are receding, and global inventory levels are rebalancing. In agreement with that, the S&P Global Market Intelligence study said that 2023 was the year that supply chains returned to normal, and its Global Purchasing Manager Index showed that global manufacturing supplier delivery times in May of 2023 was the fastest since 2019. Generally, rates for trucking, ocean shipping, and other transportation fell last year as consumers moved from purchasing larger ticket items to the smaller priced items, some of that due to inflation. And last year, supply chain disruptions dropped by over 50%. However, that's until we had a big, huge disruptive event in the Red Sea. According to Jonathan Gold, VP Supply Chain for the National Retail Federation, he says attacks on cargo ships in the Red Sea and the disruptions caused by those attacks have once again created volatility in retail supply chains. And of course, retailers are working with carrier partners on mitigating strategies to limit the impact. One factor is that it's not the holiday season, so the disruption is probably smaller than it could have been. However, the increase in lead time will result in cost hikes. And according to Balika Somalia from Kearney, she said if the Red Sea situation continues, retailers may end up seeing longer lead times for products. So right now, the retailers are watching and adjusting Q2 forecasts in their holiday forecast. So I'd say pretty volatile right now, but it's still early in the year.
Yeah, we'll talk a little more about what's going on in the Red Sea in just a minute with Anna here, because it has been dramatic how quickly that developed. really, you think of between what's going on in Panama and the Red Sea, we had these two massive early 20th or mid 20th century construction projects, the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, to make it easier to ship things globally. And neither one of those is really working the way it's supposed to anymore. So it's really upsetting a lot of the global trade. So let's move on now to that outlook. Let's start talking a little more about 24. And Anna, you've written a lot about what's going on in the Panama Canal. Maybe you can update us on the latest from the Panama Canal, and then we can talk about the Red Sea and the Suez Canal next.
Yeah, so there are a lot of prevailing issues in Panama with the ongoing drought, and January, I believe, marked the beginning of the dry season. And since the canal runs on fresh water, it's really affected by droughts, and especially the dry season that will go on until May. Back in October, they initially restricted booking slots for January to 20, but since then it has been revised to 24. So we might see transit numbers increase, but that number is still significantly down from the usual 36 daily transits, which obviously is causing time and money problems for companies. Companies are offloading cargo onto trucks and railroads because of tonnage restrictions. Some shippers are paying to get to the front of the line, which can cost a lot of money, and others are taking other routes around Africa or South America. And so where this goes in the short term sort of depends on what the rainy season will look like starting around May. And longer term, it's going to more depend on water conservation efforts in the country. But because ships are taking other routes, like I said, around Africa, South America, the Strait of Magellan, some were going to the Suez Canal to overcome the bottlenecks, but now there's a problem there. So many container ships that were going to go through the Suez Canal are going around Africa and the Cape of Good Hope to avoid the Red Sea and avoid that risk. But that detour I've seen adds around 3,500 nautical miles and about 10 to 12 days of sailing time to each trip, which adds extra costs and extends delivery times for shippers. We've also seen companies in that area halting production and halting outputs due to the conflict. There have been, security initiatives taken on by countries, but many companies are still hesitant to send their container ships through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Many experts think that the cost will end up coming down to the end user. Some are projecting, price increases, delays, shortages in the coming weeks. But the total economic impact on end users is sort of yet to be seen and can be difficult to predict, especially because we don't know how long we can expect the conflict to go on for. I've seen some experts say that they expect shipments and the economy to start adjusting to this sort of new normal with kind of, like Adrian was saying, volatile situations. So we'll just have to see how supply chains for companies and just how the resiliency of the global supply chain will respond to the disruptions.
Right. I mean, we've already heard from some major manufacturers. Tesla had to shut down production in Germany briefly because they couldn't get materials through the Suez Canal and had to go around the Cape of Good Hope. That's a lot longer. It's a lot. Africa's a big continent, and it's hard to get around. Like you said, 10 days is a lot of time if you're operating just-in-time supply chains for automotive plants. And Tesla's not going to be the only one. There are going to be other manufacturers who are counting on those goods. And there are going to be goods coming from Europe and Asia that are going to be delayed getting to parts of the U.S. as well. So always interesting to see what's going on, how global conflicts impact trade. Kevin, back to the U.S., back to trucking. How's 2024 looking? You touched on that a little bit, but what's your outlook?
Well, back to the parts manufacturers and distributors convention where I've been this week. 2 years ago, the supply chain crash was all the news. Last year, it was all about solutions that were already in the work, and nearshoring was definitely one of the things that got talked about a lot. In fact, our staff visited a supplier down in Coahuila in Mexico. Of course, there aren't any ports in the Chihuahuan Desert, and rail service is dubious, often at best. So, in theory, this is great for trucking. And a lot of truck manufacturers are also based down there already. So suppliers are relocating from Asia. The head of the company that moved their operations down there, their headquarters are in Long Beach. And he was tired of looking at all the ships when he went to work, sitting offshore waiting to come in to unload. And a lot of them he knew had his boxes on them. So he's really enthusiastic about nearshoring, and he loves the workforce in Mexico. So that north-south corridor, for that matter, Navistar International just built a top-of-the-line truck manufacturing plant in San Antonio to take advantage of all this north-south trade, with inputs coming down from the U.S. into Mexico and finished products coming back. So that's very exciting for trucking, assuming that we can get across the border, and that's become the bottleneck now. The ports of entry are backed up; they can't handle the loads, and then the migrant situation makes it worse. So pretty much optimistic. We thought we had things under control before this latest round of global issues with the supply chain. But again, trucking thinks they're in good shape because the more problems overseas, the more things come back to the U.S., and those need trucks.
Yeah, you mentioned the trucking situation in Mexico. I was down there last summer for a plant tour, and it's amazing to me how this large, geographically diverse country doesn't seem to really have a strong port or rail industry. Almost everything that, even the center of the country, the Bahia region where all the automotive production is done, it's almost everything's coming in on trucks, everything's leaving on trucks. Oh, very little rail movement. Very different from the Canada or the U.S. where most of that output goes onto a flatbed of some sort and gets on rails. So, moving over to you, Tyler. Big picture. What are you talked a little bit about this? Last year was good for technology and the supply chain. What do you see driving 2024?
Sure. So again, I would say something to really keep an eye on would be trying to monitor the announcements and progress coming out of the White House Supply Chain Resilience Council. That is investment on a federal level that we have never seen before. And so I think we'll definitely see some new ideas and maybe some reassurance of that investment in technology. Again, like I just reiterated, is the digital transformation. That investment in technology is going to be major. I'm going to steal a term that I heard from someone I was interviewing this week. They used the phrase black swan events, and that was in reference to the attacks in the Red Sea, the Panama Canal, going back to even COVID. Businesses are not going to be able to navigate and survive these black swan events if they don't have the digital infrastructure, that data availability and transparency to operate on, to make decisions on. So I think 2024, everyone has heard the wake-up call already to get on board with this digital transformation. Excuse me. Interesting thing, I'm going to focus on the semiconductor market. The IDC made a statement saying that they're going to suggest a 20% annual growth rate, and that's pretty significant. I think we're going beyond recovery at this point, and starting to see some growth. Some key drivers for that, I think, talking about Kevin's world, is the transportation industry and the automotive industry. Vehicles are developing at a very rapid pace, and the amount of semiconductors and chips that are needed in a modern vehicle today is in the thousands. And so that's going to be a major driver. Artificial intelligence and 5G infrastructure, those are going to be major drivers for more chips and chip manufacturing. And then, of course, the continued miniaturization and advanced packaging for consumer goods. That's another driver. Some challenge areas, I think the biggest one is just going to be economic and demand uncertainty. There's still, a lot to a lot of metrics to watch with inflation and interest rates, and consumer demand is contingent on a lot of things right now. So keeping an eye out on the economic uncertainty, especially during an election year. There could be some challenges there with maybe some not so clear future ahead. But I think for the most part, we're going to see a big investment in a lot of technology-based industries, and there should be a positive outlook for 2024.
Great. Yeah, we see this constantly here. The need for better visibility into just about everything has been a driver. Maybe that will continue. You mentioned the rise in computer chips in automotive. It's easy to point to electric vehicles and things like that, but just if you're driving a big diesel truck these days, you probably have an information system in there it looks like a tablet and acts like a tablet. That's run by chips. The diesel engine itself is going to be heavily computer controlled. The number of systems just in every type of vehicle these days is going up dramatically, and that's driving. Last year was one of the biggest years of investments we've ever seen in American manufacturing, almost entirely driven by electric vehicle battery plants and for computer chips. And Kevin, you wanted to make a comment on the chips as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it was ironic that you got 10-ton, $200,000 trucks, red tag sitting on staging lots because of missing microprocessor chips that individually might not cost a whole lot of money, but they're very specialized and they don't play well with other chips, and that's definitely was a key problem for trucking. And again, that spills over the whole supply chain. It's not just trucks can't go out, then trucks can't carry the freight that everybody else needs. So it's huge.
So Adrian, let's close up with you here, just from the MH&L perspective, the material handling and logistics. What does today's output look like? Your outlook look like? You talked a little bit about this when you were talking about 2023, but where do you see the challenges in 2024?
I think the disruptions are going to continue. A lot of the factors that were 2023 are going to continue in 24, but I think to Tyler's point, I think the companies have really figured out the technology is going to address these issues. Abe Ashkenazi, CEO of the Association of Supply Chain Managers, made the statement that he sees, much like Tyler was saying, the trends are visibility, traceability, and location intelligence, and that will enable the supply chains to track the movements. He also feels that this will have an economic effect and that stakeholders will enjoy greater access to near-time data related to orders, inventory, delivery, and potential disruptions. There was an interesting article in the Harvard Business Review, in November of 2023, and they were talking about what some of the bigger companies are doing in terms of AI technologies. So they were talking about, Walmart, Maersk, Siemens, and Unilever, and they were all using advanced AI technologies to bring greater visibility into their supply chains. Unilever and Siemens are using that to find alternative supply sources on short notice. Their director of supply chain excellence said that the technology can provide information that helps him respond to supply chains disruptions faster than the human buyers can. Another interesting way I thought they were using AI is to automate negotiations. Maersk and Walmart are using a system that provides chatbots that can quickly search for transportation rates, or actually have the bot secure a quote if nothing is available. And Walmart uses it to negotiate with their tail end suppliers. As far as looking a little further into the future, Yossi Sheffi is the director of the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. He says the companies must perform trade-offs between cost and resiliency by evaluating many factors, including workforce availability, geopolitical considerations, cultural differences, and then reconfigure their supply bases. So I think similar to what everybody is saying, you're just going to have to do things differently going forward.
You mentioned labor availability, and Kevin, obviously this is a massive concern in the trucking world. It's a massive concern everywhere. There's not an industry today that is not short on people. And it does not look like demographics are going to help us anytime soon. The last couple of jobs reports are showing unemployment is at record lows, and the number of people voluntarily quitting their jobs might be down, and a few of those metrics, but it doesn't look like there are a lot of people out there to be had. And I'm hearing lots of concern about finding people to drive trucks, finding people to man factories, finding people to work in warehouses. So that's just like every other industry, that seems to be, it's going to be one of the big challenges in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, Robert, truck drivers, perpetually, there's the argument of, well, if you paid them more, you'd have more willing to work. But, that's not going to change. On the other hand, the takeaway from this meeting that I was this week is distributors are tired of suppliers making excuses. And the supplier's number one excuse has been, we don't have the personnel to do what you want us to do. But the distributors are tired of hearing that, and they're tired of hearing it's going to get better tomorrow. So that was kind of the takeaway that I had this week.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for spending time with us. And again, if you're out there in the audience listening, you want to get more regular information on the supply chain world, we do have a Market Move Supply Chain, which is our new newsletter. It gathers information from lots of different publications around Endeavor Business Media. So you'll see things from Kevin and Adrian and myself and Anna and Tyler and large number of other editors throughout our company who are constantly looking at issues that affect the economy and affect the shipping world. Thank you for your time today, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Robert.